on this floor that I have to clean up later. But I appreciate it. You are welcome here. Let's all just give a big round of applause for our events team for paying. Mr. Slobber here was very instrumental in doing this. So after this is over, if you had fun, please go thank them for allowing this to happen. So let's get started. I'm sure you've noticed that it is spooky season. It's upon us. It's that time of year again where it's like, it's cool to scare people, like it's cool to hide in doorways and jump out of them. Like it wasn't cool before, but now it is. We've reached that point where horrors lie behind everywhere. Like just scary things. You know, there's the typical. You run into vampires, werewolves, skeletons. They're scarier things. Like whatever Bennett has on right now. It's terrifying. I don't know what that is. He's got like a fluffy neck. There's like scary things that I don't even understand. Like, okay, here's one thing. Hear me. You know when you have to call somebody, but you've never like spoke to them before, so you pick the number in the phone and like, I don't know if I'm gonna. And you call them and you're like shaking. Is that just me? Like calling people? It's just me. Okay, well that's great. There's a lot of things that we're scared of that we don't understand why, I guess. Like there's different levels of fear. You know, there's like fear of the known, fear of the unknown, and then fear of the stuff you don't really understand. There's some more scary stuff. Signing up to speak in front of like 40, 50 people is a little scary. But there's a point to fear sometimes. And I'll get to that. One thing that I am afraid of, and I'm ashamed to admit it, is haircuts, as you may have noticed. I just, okay, look, I have this like luxurious mane, right? And I'm just scared that someone's gonna come in and start chopping, and they're not gonna care about me as a person in my hair. But this isn't new. Like this whole like long hair hippie fear of haircut thing isn't new. And it started when I was like 7 or 8. My parents loved to tell this story. That I couldn't go to barbershops as a kid. I couldn't go into hair salons. I wouldn't let people cut my hair. Something about like sharp blades near my ears and fear of a bolt. Like these are like deep-seated fears within me, you know, that have started since I was like super young. But my parents would not have allowed this to happen in their home. So I got haircuts anyway. Maybe asking how that happened if I was so deafy. Thank you. You may be asking yourself, how did I get a haircut if I was deathly afraid of barbers and barbershops and sharp things? Well, I had to go to my grandpa's house because he had this little shed off the side of his house with a kind of old-timey antique barber chair and kind of like swivels and stuff. He had like a barber set with like a razor and scissors, and so I would go over there and he would cut my hair, and it was like a family ordeal. Like my parents would be there, my little brother would be there, they all cheering me on. I got promised like M&Ms at the end of it, so I loved M&Ms, and everybody was cheering for me, and I shouldn't have been afraid, but I was. I was still terrified. Even though it was like my grandfather cutting my hair, right? I'm like freaked out. I have no reason to be afraid, right? Like I know who's doing the haircutting. I know who's like around me and with me. I know what's going to happen. I know why I'm getting a haircut. But still, I'm afraid, for whatever reason. So I'm sure there's some things you can relate to in that. There's like irrational fears, right? Stuff that doesn't exactly make sense if we look at it. I look at a story tonight in Matthew, chapter 14, about some people who were pretty afraid. I'll say that. They were pretty afraid. So let's look at what they were scared of and see if we can get anything out of it. So starting in verse 22, immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. Now, if it's your first time reading this passage, right, and pretend you don't see what happens next, don't read ahead. Pretend that's not there. And you've never seen this before, what's something you think might happen? You know, to give some context, the disciples here on the boat have been with Jesus for a long enough time to know who he is and what he does, right? Just before this, he fed 5,000 people with like 2 loaves of bread. He's healed a man of leprosy. He's healed all sorts of sick. He's casted out demons. So they know who Jesus is, right? And if you're reading this and you think, in their position, you're on a boat, you're in the ocean, there's a storm, it's getting scary, but you see someone walking towards you, you would think, oh, it's this guy I've been hanging out with who does stuff like this. You know, oh, it's Jesus. He's here for me. He's here to help me. He's going to bring me back to the shore. He's going to stop the storms. That's what would make sense, right? But that's not really what happens. Verse 26, when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. Why were they scared? You know, like, why would you be scared? Like, there's certainly things that would make it easier to be scared. You know, I think earlier it mentions that it's in, like, the middle of the night. Most sources place it, like, between 3 and 6 in the morning, so it's probably pitch black. There's obviously a big storm, right? They're in this little rinky-dink boat away from the shore. They're isolated. There's nothing near them. It's scary. But Jesus is there, and they know Jesus. So why be afraid, right? It's easy for me to look at this and look down upon the disciples who were there. Because I think, oh, if I was just there, you know. If I was just there with the disciples and I get to see Jesus, you know, if I get to experience Jesus, if I get to walk with him every day, then I would be afraid, right? Maybe that's just me, but I look into this and I kind of think the disciples as like, you gotta be kidding me. Like, Jesus is there with you. Why are you afraid? And I think it's because they focus on the wrong thing. See, even though Jesus is there with them, they focus on the storm. They focus on the things that are going wrong around them, right? They're looking at the waves, they're looking at the wind, they're looking at they're far from shore, but they don't notice that Jesus Christ is coming towards them. They're focusing on all the wrong things. And even though it's easy to look at these people and say, well, why couldn't you just, you know, have faith, been happy to see Jesus, to not be afraid? I think it describes us in a way. Because we know Jesus, right? Like, they know Jesus because they are with him every day. But isn't he with us? You know, if we're Christians, the Holy Spirit resides in us. Jesus has died for us, right? We could read for the things he's done. In a way, he's closer to us than he ever was to them. But we still get afraid. And for the same reasons that the disciples were afraid. Because we focus on the storm, right? We focus on all the wrong things. I think we let anxieties get the best of us sometimes. I think it's easy to focus on the things that are wrong, the things that are going on around us. We miss the whole point, right? We miss Jesus right in front of us. Verse 27, as Jesus is walking, he immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." So we're continuing with this kind of relation between the disciples and us. Jesus does the very same thing that he does to the disciples. He makes himself known, right? Like, I should have brought my Bible up here so I can thump it. But like, we got this. Pretend I'm holding a Bible. We got this. This. And it's full of what he's done for us, for others, his chosen people, the people that weren't his chosen people and became his chosen people. We know Jesus because he tells us who he is. And then he says these 3 words, which is just, I'll say it, it's kind of like it's a wild thing to say. If you just say, don't be afraid, right? I'm in a storm, it's 3 in the morning, there's wind, waves, there's a ghost walking towards me. He says, be not afraid. And I'm like, oh, I'm afraid, like you're scaring me. Like, that's the natural response, right? Is to be afraid. So there's stuff around us, isn't it just like natural to see that? To be afraid? Jesus would disagree, I think. I think Jesus knows what he brings to us. He knows what his presence means to us. And he tells us don't be afraid. It's very simple, but it's, you know, It's hard to do. If someone comes up to you and you're anxious about an exam, you're worried you said something wrong to a friend or family member, and they say, oh, just forget about it. You know, don't worry about it. You're just like, oh, thanks. Thanks for the advice. I appreciate that. But that's, are they wrong? No. Is it hard? Of course. When someone tells you, just don't be afraid. I think Jesus wants us to do the hard things. The right things, but the hard things. Peter provides a good example of what to do next. He says, Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. He continues, then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. Peter did that really crucial, important thing about Christianity. He made that step, right? And sometimes we think when we make that step, we're doing it kind of alone. When we do something to make us better Christians, to become Christians, we feel like we're doing it alone. Like it's something we do and no one's there with us. But right before this, Jesus is walking towards them, right? Jesus has already come to us. Peter only has to step a couple of times and he's there with Jesus. I think that's how it is today, right? Jesus has already came to this earth. He's already died. He's taken on our anxieties and our fears and our worries, and all we have to do is step to him. And then, again, Peter is relatable. Verse 30, when he saw the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. I mean, Peter does a crazy thing, right? Which is walking on the water. But then he does that thing we all do, and he looks around. Right? Sometimes we're trying to become better Christians, better people, and we get distracted. Right? We know what the right thing to do is. We know what Jesus is at a certain point. We get distracted. Right? It's so easy today. There's so many distractions. I mean, this is us, isn't it? Peter is kind of us in this scenario. We look at him and someone think that he's wrong for sinking. But that's what we do. That's what we do every day. And then Jesus steps in immediately, reaches out his hands and caught him. You have little faith, he said. Why did you doubt? And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. If Jesus has walked towards us, all we need to do is take a couple steps. Right? Jesus has made this big journey. He's come down from heaven. Didn't have to do it. He taught us what it means to be a good person and Christian. Didn't have to do that. Died for us. Didn't have to do that. And now all he wants is that we take a couple of steps. We know it's not hard because Jesus was able to reach out and grab Peter. We only need to take a couple of steps to meet Jesus' presence. But that fear is still there, right? And it's easy for me to stand up here and say, oh, just be not afraid and go to Jesus. That's easy to say. But it's really hard, right? Because we have those irrational fears. When I'm sitting in my grandpa's shed, in his barbershop chair, I really shouldn't be afraid. I know who's cutting my hair. My grandpa. He knows me. He loves me. He cares for me. He's in control of the situation, but I'm still afraid. I'd like to challenge you, just this moment, this itty bitty one, to cast your anxieties and your fears on Jesus. I know it's hard, and I only talk about the things that I have trouble with. It's hard to do what Jesus tells us to do. It's hard to take that fear, that anxiety of an exam, and just say, you know what, Jesus, this is for you to take care of. I'm just here, use me as you will. That's hard to do. But what's Jesus say? He says, it is I, don't be afraid. Jesus has come to us. Just take a couple of steps.